Windows 11 runs on roughly 50 million lines of code. Print that out and it would stretch 131 miles end to end. Sounds impressive, but this isn't some modern marvel. It is a 40-year-old disaster in the making. The constant glitches, the blue screens, and the 240 million PCs that became instant landfill waste. And if you look closely enough, you'll see Microsoft's biggest mistakes weren't accidents. They were calculated, strategic sabotage. Chapter 1. The 50 million line time bomb. If you're using Windows, there's a good chance you're actually running Windows NT under the hood. And when that first launched in Windows NT 3.1, it already contained 5.6 million lines of code. At the time, that was massive, but it wasn't built for consumers. NT was designed for workstations and enterprise servers, where stability mattered more than simplicity and backward compatibility mattered more than elegance. But then something changed. It began powering just about everything. Over time, it became the foundation for everything Windows runs on today, and with each new generation, it only became more complex. It's become harder to maintain and more prone to performance issues, slowdowns, and unexpected glitches with every major release. It reached a breaking point in 2021 with the launch of Windows 11, the most bloated and intricate version Microsoft had ever released. And this time, users couldn't ignore the elephant in the room, because for the first time, their computer simply couldn't handle it. Windows 11 now comes pre-installed on all new Microsoft devices, and it's offered as a free upgrade for existing PCs, but only if they meet the system requirements. That list is thinner than most people expect. You need a compatible 64-bit processor, at least 4 gigs of memory, and 64 gigs of storage. On paper, that sounds reasonable. In reality, it quietly excludes a massive number of older machines that are still perfectly functional. Anyone with an older workhorse computer has to upgrade or be left behind. And for millions of devices, that doesn't mean a slow transition. It means obsolescence. Millions of computers are destined for the landfill. It's turning into the biggest upheaval in Microsoft history. The term backwards compatibility is familiar to gamers, and for a long time it was a frustration point. When a new console launches, support for older systems doesn't last long. New games stop releasing for the older hardware, and eventually upgrading becomes the only way to keep playing. But in earlier generations, it went even further. New consoles often couldn't even run old games at all. This was often due to incompatible hardware, especially during the cartridge era. But there's also another reason backwards compatibility is hard to come by. It simply does not make the company money. Windows 11 is seen by most users as a bloated mess of a user interface, and that's not surprising. At this point, Windows NT is built on a 40-year-old foundation of code that never quite stopped being built. What is left is unwieldy and prone to glitches, but it's paying dividends. When Windows 11 dropped, it's estimated that around 50 to 55% of existing devices were incompatible with it. Those users all had to buy new devices. A massive windfall for Microsoft. Was it a lack of foresight or by design? And if it was the latter, which other massive Microsoft screw-ups were by design? Chapter 2. The Sacrificial Lamb, Windows Me. In 2000, Microsoft was still the dominant force of home computing, long before Apple's resurgence. Windows 98 was everywhere. It ran on most home PCs, defining an entire era of personal computing. But it was aging and Microsoft desperately needed a replacement. So they introduced a new system, Windows Me, also known as Windows Millennium Edition. It would become one of the worst ways to start a new millennium. Windows Me promised a new interface, quicker startup times, and built-in internet features for the emerging web era. The consumer versions could theoretically handle up to 1.5 gigs of RAM, but most users had limited need for heavy-duty computing. So when it launched, the system gained applause for its enhanced security systems. And then reality set in. Windows Me was plagued with glitches. People reported that the security and maintenance system, named PC Health, wouldn't work properly. The computers that upgraded were experiencing frequent malfunctions and slowdowns. Computers wouldn't even shut down properly. With overheating already common on older desktops, people began to worry that they installed a Trojan horse onto their systems. Microsoft would respond sooner than expected. As the negative word of mouth continued to grow for Windows Me, the company released some limited fixes. Given the scale of the issues, many critics went as far as calling it unusable, even a downgrade from Windows 98. So it wasn't surprising when Microsoft announced a replacement less than a year later. Windows XP. Released just 13 months after Windows Me, it introduced what now feels like basic features like a built-in zip folder support, and far more stable foundation. Windows Me had been a disaster, but it was also one Microsoft was eager to move past and one the industry quickly forgot. Windows XP was the first consumer-focused operating system built on the Windows NT kernel, a far more stable foundation than what came before it. Today it's often seen as the start of modern Windows. On the surface it looks like poor planning, releasing a major new operating system only to abandon its predecessor less than a year later. But it wasn't. It was deliberate. Leaked internal memos from 1999 mention a project codenamed Neptune. It was an early attempt to bring NT architecture to consumer machines, but the project was eventually scrapped and folded into something larger, something that became Windows XP. Meanwhile, Windows Me still shipped to market, retailing for around $209 for the full version or between $59 and $109 for qualifying upgrades. And it delivered what many users remember as instability, frustration, and constant technical issues. This was seen as one of Microsoft's big early screw-ups. But it wasn't. It was a disaster by design, and it did exactly what the company intended: a rushed stopgap to squeeze one last paycheck out of a dying technology. And it wouldn't be the only time Microsoft played its loyal customers like a fiddle. Chapter 3: The $2,100 Email Machine. The next major shift came in 2007. Windows Vista was Microsoft's first major successor to Windows XP, released 5 years after its hugely successful predecessor. And a lot had changed in that time. Home computers were faster and more capable. Customers weren't sure if their older computers were going to be capable of handling the new program, which contained much more code than the previous version. When it was announced, Microsoft claimed that nearly every PC on the market could at the time be able to run Windows Vista. They could, just not very well. A lot of PCs at the time ran on Intel processing chips, and their current graphic card chipset was seen as underpowered for running the slick new 3D interface that rolled out with Vista. Seeing the concern, Microsoft promised they would classify PCs as Vista Capable if they were usable with the new program. This led to many users upgrading their PCs after years of holding out just to run the new system. A large number of them chose the popular, relatively affordable Intel-powered machines. It turned out to be a costly mistake. There's a difference between running a program and running it in a way that is usable. Those who tried to run Windows Vista on these new PCs, some of which could run up to $2,100 at the time, would find that many key functions were missing. The computers didn't handle the complex interface, and that left them to be able to do little more with their new PC than send emails, and Microsoft found itself besieged with complaints. This eventually led to a class action lawsuit where many documents from the development period were unsealed. After all, if a lawnmower manufacturer slaps Ferrari Capable on one of their products, it doesn't make it so. Again, that was another deliberate strategy. Internal emails showed that Microsoft very well knew that these Vista-capable systems were not up to par. Corporate Vice President of Windows Product Management Mike Nash saying, "I now have a $2,100 email machine." Former Microsoft co-president Jim Allchin even raised concerns about misleading customers. Internal emails also revealed frustration from Hewlett-Packard, which found itself caught between Microsoft and a wave of unhappy customers. The situation escalated into legal action, including a class action lawsuit that was eventually decertified, but not before internal documents painted a clearer picture of what was happening behind the scenes. Microsoft had engineered the fiasco to ensure their partner Intel met its quarterly earnings goal. The customers were screwed over for corporate gamesmanship, and it wouldn't be the last time. Chapter 4: The Trojan Horse, Windows 8. The releases were coming faster now, and in 2012 customers were greeted with Windows 8. This would turn out to be one of the most controversial Windows releases yet, and not because people were finding themselves locked out of features. Rather, everyone was on the same page on this one, and that wasn't a good thing. This was the first Windows model to feature a new user interface, Metro. At the time, mobile devices were exploding in popularity, and Apple's iPad had already become the dominant way to browse the internet. Microsoft wanted to mimic that success, whether the users wanted it or not. Metro used a simplified format that involved shortcut icons to apps, minimalist design, and an optimized desktop. This would mean the apps people clicked on most often were the first ones that they saw when they opened it. On mobile devices, that seemed to be a success, as app-based navigation was what most people used. But on the desktop, that was a different story. The full-screen start screen worked well on tablets, but on desktop PCs, it quickly became a problem. It looked clean, but it made precise workflows harder, and the shift to full-screen apps made multitasking feel clunky, even restrictive. For many users, especially in business environments, it did not feel like an upgrade. It felt like a step backwards. When Windows 8 launched in 2012, that tension became impossible to ignore. The interface was designed around touchscreens, but most users were still on traditional desktops. It quickly became a nightmare. The full-screen apps made multitasking frustrating, if not impossible, and the PCs were seen as a poor fit for business use. A failed attempt to copy the iPad, or something worse. The Metro user interface, which would later be renamed Modern, was designed for everyday users, but everyone else was pulled into it, whether they wanted it or not. UX designer Jacob Miller, who worked on Metro, later commented in a 2014 Reddit discussion, clarifying some of the design intent behind it. He explained that the interface was built with casual users in mind, who Microsoft believed represented the majority of its customer base. The hardcore users would just have to deal with it. It was a mercenary decision designed to boost Microsoft's long-term sales prospects. The professional users were the heaviest buyers, but they were relatively few in numbers. Content creators and tech experts were heavily outnumbered by grandmas and gamers, but the casual users didn't like when new features were too complex for them to use. So Microsoft decided to move toward a simplified Windows interface that everyone would have to use, expanding its user base in the process. The assumption was that the users with the most invested in the platform would adapt over time, rather than abandon it and start fresh with new systems. The users weren't customers, they were the product, and the worst was yet to come. Chapter 5: The Great PC Purge. Windows kept on rolling out new releases for the next few years, with all models being seen as minor updates. That was until Windows 10 dropped in 2015. This one was promised as the biggest upgrade to Windows in years, a unified version optimized to run across all devices. The user interface was heavily designed for mobile and incorporated new gaming technologies. When it was announced, it was seen as a promising update for a brand that was starting to be seen as outdated. There was just one problem: your computer might not run it. Windows 11 was positioned as a fresh start for Microsoft. Windows 10 support was gradually phased out and Windows 11 became the only real way forward. But the shift came with a catch. The system requirements were the strictest Microsoft had ever set. Modern 64-bit processor, multiple cores, 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage, DirectX 12 graphics, a high-definition display. Individually, these all sound reasonable. Together, they quietly excluded a huge portion of older but still functional machines. But the real breaking point wasn't performance, it was security. Windows 11 required a TPM 2.0 chip, known as the Trusted Platform Module. It was designed to store encryption keys and biometric data in a way that protects the physical device from tampering. And unlike CPU or memory requirements, it wasn't something that you could just upgrade easily. Because TPM 2.0 only became common in consumer PCs around 2015, it meant millions of computers were suddenly locked out. It would lead to the greatest PC purge in electronics history. With one fell swoop, as many as 60% of PCs used for Windows computing were instantly removed from the upgrade path, unable to use the newest software. Some stubborn users powered through with the old technology, but the vast majority just decided it was time to get a new computer. According to Canalys Research, that upgrade barrier led to a massive cull of technology, sending an estimated 240 million PCs to the landfill by the end of 2025. And that won't just impact your pocketbook, it will impact the world. That's around 105 million pounds of electronics waste. It weighs about the equivalent of 320,000 cars. Folded and stacked flat on top of each other, they would be more than 370 miles taller than the diameter of the moon. It raised serious concerns about an environmental ripple effect, and millions of still working computers became obsolete overnight, feeding into an already growing e-waste problem that's difficult to recycle or safely dispose of at scale. But Microsoft maintained its position. This wasn't an accident. In their view, it was a necessary reset, one that would clear the foundation for the next phase of their product ecosystem. Microsoft had experienced a historic hardware boom during the COVID-19 pandemic. The strict hardware requirements of Windows 11 promised to force another massive wave of new PC sales to keep the momentum going. Not only would it give them the biggest new product launch of the new era, but it would lead to a buying spree of new PCs by people who needed to meet the system requirements. And it definitely worked. In May 2021, the stock was sitting at just below $250 a share. It surged to $555 a share before settling at its May 2026 point of over $400 a share. Windows 11 has been a winner for the company, despite and maybe because of the anger that forced many people to start anew with a fresh PC. But it's not just about the new computer, it's about what's going into them. Chapter 6: Telemetry Debt – The Spy in the Shell. One of the biggest topics in computing lately is security, not just from outside hackers but from the company itself. Computers are more connected to the internet and to third-party applications than ever before. Smartphone users are familiar with this, but until recently, desktop computers were seen as more secure. That might be changing. There's been a recent focus on Windows 11 telemetry. That's the automated process of collecting and transmitting data from your computer to exterior sources. It turns out your computer is always talking. An analysis by the PC Security Channel showed that Windows 11 is very active in collecting diagnostic, usage, and performance data as you work. Users quickly began looking for ways to disable it, and while some of it could be limited, a baseline level of telemetry is effectively unavoidable. But Windows 11 goes further than most users expected. Even before the user opens a web browser, the computer is active and analyzing your data. Then it delivers it to the Microsoft servers so it can ostensibly optimize your performance and to sell you things. According to the critics of the modern OS, Windows 11 is little more than an ad delivery system that you are paying extra for. The software has been known for its display ads and promos as soon as you turn it on, offering you suggestions for new Microsoft products and features based on your ongoing activity. It's not exactly new behavior, but for most people it is just more hassle than it's worth to turn it off. Digging through the systems and turning off features like personalization, as well as upgrading privacy settings, can minimize the number of ads that show up. In recent updates, users have reported seeing fewer ads, but users have seen behind the curtain now. Even if they're not seeing the ads, they know that Microsoft is watching them and taking notes. It's a far cry from the clean, easy-to-use Windows 7. But some worry the privacy issues are just beginning, because Microsoft is out to win the next war. Chapter 7: The Final Fuck-Up. Windows 11 has had several updates since it launched in 2021, but none as controversial as Windows Recall. It was a part of Microsoft's broader Copilot system, an AI-powered assistant rolled out across its products in 2024 through a partnership with OpenAI. Instead of building its own model from scratch like some competitors, Microsoft integrated existing AI technology directly into Windows. The chatbot was supposed to be a built-in assistant that could help write text, automate everyday tasks, and offer real-time suggestions across the system. But what they didn't know was it was spying on them all the time. Windows Recall was positioned as a flagship feature, but most users would never interact with it directly or even know it existed. That is, unless they were watching the press conference where it was unveiled in May 2024. It sounded deceptively simple. It would automatically take a screenshot of the desktop every few seconds, creating a record of everything you do. If you lost any information, it'd be easy to look it up. Your computer now knew what you were doing all the time. And so did any hacker or malware that managed to get into your system. As soon as people heard about this feature, the backlash was immediate. People didn't want their privacy logged to this extent, especially as no one knew about the security of the data. Making it worse, the feature was going to be turned on by default. This wasn't so much a backup or security feature as automatic spyware that comes pre-installed on your computer. The criticism from both security professionals and casual users who didn't like AI was so swift that Microsoft postponed the rollout and added an opt-in feature. But the biggest problem was yet to come. It soon came out that everyone's worst fears were accurate. The initial data was being saved on a plain text database with no encryption. This created a comprehensive, easily hackable database of your life directly on your own hard drive. It was like a bank building a glass vault in your living room and then forgetting to put a lock on the door. According to cybersecurity expert Alexander Haganah, users could have all their activity compromised in a shocking breach of customer trust. And the motivation for this sloppy rollout? Microsoft just wanted to beat Apple to the AI punch. But Apple had its own major AI problems, missing several deadlines and under-delivering. Ironically, that might have been the winning hand, because Microsoft's rollout was costly and disastrous. And it all comes down to one question: does Microsoft even know what it's doing anymore? Chapter 8: The Crumbling Foundation. Windows loyalists have lived through what seems like a never-ending parade of software screw-ups, failed launches, and glitches that play casual users against professionals. With each new release, the code gets more and more complex, leading to the current bloated 50 million line monstrosity. So what could fix it? Can it even be fixed? More and more users are looking at the string of disasters and saying the problem isn't individual releases, it's the foundation. Windows keeps building on itself, but the base is rotting. With each new release, Windows seems to become more complicated and less user-friendly, and many of the new features seem like more trouble than they're worth. Analysts say the best way to fix Windows might be to simply start fresh, create a new model that would be more suited for the tastes of today's users. But to do that, they would need to ditch the backwards compatibility that's become their bread and butter. They would have to compete with all the established rivals for the market without the security of being able to transition people from one version of Windows to another. They're never going to give up that monopoly. To start over, Microsoft would have to risk everything, so the safer option is to continue releasing flawed models that aim to improve the problem with the last Windows while creating new ones. The user loses, but Microsoft's stock price wins. Microsoft isn't the only company that's leveraged everything on AI. Find out the real story and why OpenAI's IPO will crash the stock market. Or watch this video instead.